This program is brought to you in part by Alabama Gas Corporation and the Southern Natural Gas Company, providing the South with energy-efficient natural gas.
In the time before man, this was their world. They held dominion over the land, the sea, and the sky. From the ferocious to the frail, each species occupies a niche in a delicate web of life.
This program is brought to you in part by Alabama Gas Corporation and the Southern Natural Gas Company, providing the South with energy-efficient natural gas.
In the time before man, this was their world. They held dominion over the land, the sea, and the sky. From the ferocious to the frail, each species occupies a niche in a delicate web of life. To break a single strand would upset a timeless balance. Today, throughout the world, the web is in danger of collapse. The intrusion of man and the destruction of natural habitat threatens to wipe entire species out of existence. Not since the end of the dinosaurs has there been a more dangerous or deadly time. This is the story of Alabama's endangered species on the brink of extinction.
This world, as a glorious apartment of the boundless palace of the sovereign creator, is furnished with an infinite variety of animated scenes, inexpressibly beautiful and pleasing, equally free to the inspection and enjoyment of all his creatures. These words were written in the late 1700s by the great naturalist William Bartram as he explored the wild American frontier that would someday become known as Alabama, an Indian word for land of beauty. But today, this land of beauty stands drastically altered by the demands of civilization. Some of the creatures that once lived here have vanished. Many others are caught up in what could be described as a stampede into oblivion. A stampede that was set in motion over 450 years ago.
At the end of the Great Ice Age, a new footprint appeared in the wilds of Alabama. A skilled hunter and a talented farmer, the American Indian developed a rich culture that thrived in relative harmony with the environment. This way of life ended in 1540 with the arrival of the Europeans. Explorer Hernando de Soto came looking for gold. He left behind disease and destruction. In the centuries that followed, the Spanish, the French, and finally the English came to take what the land had to offer. Native buffalo herds were wiped out by 1800. Early settlers killed off predators to protect livestock. Black bear died by the hundreds. The red wolf would vanish by the turn of the century, never to be seen again in the Alabama wild. The eastern cougar would soon follow. Ancient cathedral forest fell to clear vast tracts of land for farming. Atrocious land management practices brought soil erosion. Creeks and rivers choked with mud. By the time of the Civil War, Alabama was in a state of biological panic, and the worst was yet to come.
Frankly, we don't know what many of these species were that disappeared. After the Civil War, the South is largely destroyed. In the reconstruction and rebuilding process, northern industrialists come to Alabama and bring with them the full trappings of the Industrial Revolution. Chemical pollution, biological pollution, destruction, first-rate destruction of the universe.
Just as the Northern Army destroyed the Old South, Northern industrialists irrevocably changed the Alabama landscape. Old-growth forests were decimated. By 1893, a once common fish called the hairlip sucker was extinct. The entire species starved to death because waters loaded with silt made it impossible to feed. In 1914, the last known passenger pigeon died in the Cincinnati Zoo. Flocks of these birds were once so large in Alabama, they were said to block out the sun. At the same time, a new South city called Birmingham was booming. Massive ironworks filled the skies with smoke. Unrestricted mining scarred the land and poisoned streams. Species that existed for eons disappeared in the biological blink of an eye. Perhaps the greatest environmental blows of all were struck soon after the turn of the century. The construction of locks and dams facilitated barge traffic for the removal of Alabama's raw materials. Hydroelectric dams brought electricity to the rural South. Scores of aquatic species saw their world change virtually overnight.
Obviously, there were many more large migratory fishes in the state because they had free access to all rivers and streams that existed in Alabama. I'm certain that there were many more things like sturgeon and paddlefish in inland portions of Alabama, because by 1915 the rivers, the Lower Tombigbee and the Black Warrior River, had been impounded, and those were fairly formidable tasks to upstream migration of anadromous and catadromous fishes. Anadromous fishes being fishes that come from salt water into fresh water to spawn, such as the Alabama shad. Catadromous fishes are fishes that go from fresh water to salt water to spawn.
The traumatic disruptions of a century ago continue to be felt today. Alabama now ranks 5th in the nation in the number of federally recognized endangered species. 55 are endangered, 19 are classified as threatened. 271 more have declined to the point where they may require special protection. These numbers are indicative of both the great distress and the great diversity of our natural habitats.
The state is incredibly diverse in its habitat types and so forth. There's a lot of areas that were right on the fringe of the species distribution just by the way the geology and the biology turned out over time. And a lot of these species were really never abundant in Alabama to start with. And over time, as man has made inroads into the state and changed the environment a great deal, you can start to see some of these fringe species be affected, and that is manifested in the high number of species we have in this state that are in an endangered status.
Keeping tabs on these species is one of the functions of Alabama's Natural Heritage Program. Biologists Scott Gunn and Mark Bailey are attempting to inventory hundreds of rare plants and animals in hopes of preventing future extinctions.
Ooh, he is a nice one. We're in the Stone Age compared to our neighboring states, I think, in a lot of knowledge about just, you know, what kind of organisms inhabit this state and where they're located. There's a few groups that we have some good handles on, but overall, there's a tremendous amount of, you know, 18th century exploring that needs to be done.
We talk about Alabama, we joke about it in our office as being a black hole of biological knowledge. If you look at the published range maps of species, you'll see dots on the maps for Georgia and for Florida and for Mississippi and for Tennessee, and there'll be one or two in Alabama where all these other states they're almost completely shaded in with dots. So we really don't have the information that we need to make informed decisions. We've got a lot more than most other states. From a fish standpoint, we have at least as many fish, or close to as many fish anyway, as Tennessee. We have about 300 species of freshwater fishes in Alabama. Many of them found no place else but in Alabama. Our amphibian fauna is very diverse. This animal right here, the black warty water dog, doesn't occur anywhere else but here in the state, and we're on the verge of losing it. We have a very, very rich, diverse fauna here. The animals of Alabama are very diverse and many very rare species. But we just don't know where they all are.
Can we find them in time?
We're trying to. A lot is going to be missed. We're not going to find every last rare species or the habitat of every rare species before we lose them, and we know some of those are going to be lost anyway.
Yeah.
Do you lose sleep about that?
Sometimes. Sometimes, not much. I mean, you know, it's not going to accomplish anything, but it's frustrating.
So much needs to be done, and for many species, there is very little time. The challenge before us today is to correct the mistakes of the past and to save what nature has given us. But each course of action brings its own price to pay. And in weighing the costs, some of Alabama's endangered species may fall short and tumble over the brink of extinction. As the scientific community continues to identify new species in Alabama, more credibility is given to a surprising theory. Outside of the world's tropical rainforests, it is possible that more forms of life exist here than you will find within the political boundaries of any similar state on Earth. Alabama is a patchwork of geologic formations, each one fostering conditions for unique forms of life. To the north, there are the mountains and plateaus of the Appalachians. To the south, the Black Belt, the coastal plains, and finally, the wetlands and the dunes of the Gulf. As we alter and pollute these habitat areas, all forms of wildlife suffer. The rarest and most delicate are the first to go.
Alabama has a large number of unusual plants because we have a very complicated geology. And because of that geology, we have seepage bogs, we have a complicated coastal plain, we go from the mountains all the way to the seacoast, we have limestone barrens. It's a very interesting flora that we have, and it's part of our heritage. Some of the things are beautiful and some are inconsequential to the onlooker, but all of them are part of what has made this state what it is. We are destroying the unusual places where the unusual plants often live. Now, we have great expanse. An example is the pitcher plant savannas down along the coast. There is one pitcher plant whose leaves have white with red stripes. It's Sarracenia leucophylla. And right now, the cut trumpets are very popular in the florist trade. And so collectors are going down and cutting off all the trumpets on these plants to sell. Well, when they do that, they destroy a lot of other things too by walking on them pulling these out, disturbing their habitat. And so while one plant is being destroyed intentionally, 100 might be being destroyed unintentionally.
It is very hard for the average person to understand why you need to protect a thing like a little plant that perhaps they've never seen in their whole life. Bald eagles are a lot easier to understand, bears, Florida panthers. But what people have to understand is that every creature, every living organism is part of the tapestry of our life here on Earth. And if you remove one thread from that tapestry, you run the risk of destroying the whole thing. You could lose it all. The interconnectedness of all living things, we're all so dependent on one another. People are dependent, we're dependent on plants, animals, and I think we're taking a real risk in losing any part of that. It's all important.
As time goes by, each year there seem to be fewer and fewer birds coming through spring and fall in migration. Silent spring refers to the fact that the songbirds that would be arriving this time of year in the spring simply aren't there to proclaim their breeding songs, to take territory, that areas are just absent, populations are just missing, and this is going on. It's a tough commentary. Virtually all these birds, and for that matter, all these species that we see going endangered, are doing so because we proclaimed it to be that way. Human beings have decided that these species are not worthy of our attention or our consideration. We make the earth an inhospitable place, and we're just pushing species off the map.
Fine things in life are absolutely free. They're free for the taking care of. That's about the way you put it.
You don't get that feeling anymore coming out here and looking at things like that, do you?
No, you say, well, my gosh, where did I make a mistake? Or you say, my gosh, is commerce and the almighty dollar worth this much sacrifice? That's the whole thing.
What have we lost out here?
Some of the things that God gave us to help us to enjoy life, that help us to recognize who He is and how powerful and how good He is. When you get to see nature as it is without the heavy footprint of man, you begin to realize that God is a caring God, that He is a providential God, that He's trying to see that we have our sanity and all that. And we don't have to get caught up in the rat race and all those tension-making things that we do. I mean, this is the key to happiness.
We're learning what we once had, and it seems to be quickly on the way out. There's one genus in particular that's very sensitive. There were many species recognized. They're almost all gone. Quite a few of them came from the Tennessee Valley and the Mobile Basin. They're good indicator organisms. They can tell you that the water quality is good until they are gone, in which case it's too late. Right now, there are diminishing populations. The Fish and Wildlife Service is listing 11 more species in addition to 15 we already have recognized as endangered by the federal government in the state of Alabama, and there are others waiting in the wings, as it were.
The streams are in poor condition compared to what they were 30, 35 years ago. There are a number of species of fishes that we used to think were quite common, and we go back to places we found them rather commonly 25 or 30 years ago, and they're no longer there. Someone will say, well, what, they'll look at a little minnow or a little darter that's, well, what's it good for? Well, you never know what something's good for until it's thoroughly studied and tested. If you can say, well, I don't know what it's good for, that really makes it invaluable.
There are plenty of reasons to care about these little fish. First of all, as I've said, they provide a good indicator of how we're treating our natural resources and how long we can get away with the practices we have today. I think they give us an indication of our health in this valley, short and long term. And so those are some pretty compelling reasons of their own. Another reason worth thinking about is that in order to protect endangered species, we need to protect habitat. And the kind of habitat the things that are vanishing need is important for a lot of reasons. I don't know, I feel like we draw some strength from places like this. And the more of us there are and the more crowded are the cities that we live in, I think the more we need some places like this to return to. So if we take care of them, there's some direct benefits for us there too. Frankly, I don't think we're in danger of becoming extinct. I think we're in danger of becoming poor. Economically and spiritually poor if we continue to erase the things from which we draw strength.
You will find that almost every argument for preserving endangered species is steeped in fundamental values. A belief that it's our natural responsibility to protect what was here before us. These concepts of an environmental ethic and stewardship of the earth can be successful if we learn to think beyond our own mortality. Endangered species are telling us that we are not living up to this responsibility, and of all our mistakes, extinction is the one that cannot be corrected.
Coming up, evidence supporting the phrase, "Life's a beach." A look at the natural residents of Alabama's endangered coast on the brink of extinction. Of all the life-giving habitat in Alabama, none is more fragile than the beaches and waters of the Gulf Coast. The dunes of the Barrier Islands, the marshes of the Tensaw Delta, and the sea itself, each supporting life that is adapted to survive in this harsh and dynamic environment.
What Alabama has is among some of the most precious habitat that exists in the world. It is indeed unique in terms of the Barrier Island, and our access to the Barrier Island is a mixed blessing. It allows us to get to the island, it allows us to experience the island, it allows us to destroy the island. And I think what scares most of us is we've got a great abundance, but we're stressing it. But it doesn't seem to dissipate gradually. It absorbs the stress and then it crashes beyond control and costs us an enormous amount to recover.
This dangerous lesson was learned to a certain extent in the late 70s, when the seemingly endless supply of fish almost vanished from state waters. To compensate for overfishing, an artificial reef was constructed with boxcars and junk sea vessels. A look through an underwater camera reveals that today, the reef is a successful breeding ground.
All right, Captain, I'm gonna come across and take a look at them.
Strict fishing limits are also in effect to protect once abundant species like the red snapper and the Spanish mackerel.
Snapper. Spanish and shark.
Okay. How often do you catch somebody violating the law?
Any time.
It's not every day.
Every day.
Just how tough a job do you have out here?
Well, most of the people we fool with commercial fishermen. These are recreational fishermen. We fool with commercial fishermen, and when you fool with them, you fool with their livelihood. And sometimes it gets rough.
These are bitter times for Gulf fishermen, especially for shrimpers. Netting techniques for shrimp also snare endangered sea turtles. By law, shrimp nets must now be equipped with turtle excluder devices. These devices allow turtles to escape the net without drowning. Watch as a captured turtle frees itself in time to reach the surface. The turtle excluders are a success, but shrimpers argue that in the process, they are also losing half of their catch.
The turtles come up right to the resort and lay their eggs. Well, how many turtles was turned away because the resort was on their nesting ground? How many turtle eggs has been destroyed by people running up and down the beach? There are not equally persecuted to the point where they can't build the condominiums and take this natural habitat back for the turtle. The commercial fisherman has to pull something with a 3-foot hole in it, lose 33% or even high as 50% plus of their catch. You can see the hole in the net. If you don't lose shrimp out of that hole, there's no cows in Texas.
Nesting sea turtles appear to be increasing on state beaches. More than a decade ago, a sight like this was extremely rare. Some communities take great pride in protecting local nests, but with each hatching comes a new tragedy. Baby turtles hatching at night often mistake street lamps for moonlight. Moonlight guides them to the sea. Street lights led these hatchlings to die in the parking lot of a Gulf Shores resort.
You've been good to me, 'cause you've been so good. Everybody's a winner.
This is a copper shrimp, copper and bronze.
How much does that sell for?
This sells for $28.
Once a sleepy beach town, Gulf Shores today is a hotel condo city. A building boom in the early 80s saw high-rises replace natural dunes, highways filled in marshes, and people moved in by the thousands.
Development in any coastal area has to maintain a fine line balance between the protection of the environment and of the quality of life, along with the meeting the public need and public desire to live and vacation and recreate near the coast. We anticipate some development not too distant future of additional golf course, residential type communities. Some additional condominium development is now underway, but it'll be quality, a little more controlled growth than what we saw back in the early 80s.
You can spot beach mouse tracks 20 and 30 feet away.
Any development threatens irreplaceable beach habitat. Undisturbed dunes like these are the home of two of the most endangered mammals on Earth, the Alabama beach mouse and the Perdido Key beach mouse. Both species can be found at Auburn University, where a captive breeding program is underway in hopes of restoring faltering natural populations.
Well, the Alabama mouse is not as critical as the Perdido Key mouse. We have pretty good population on Bon Secours Refuge, and on the main area of Bon Secours Refuge. We have a good population at Fort Morgan, which is also in public ownership at the very western end of the habitat, and then there are some populations in between. However, even with that kind of a distribution, one major hurricane like Hugo or Frederick could conceivably wipe out the subspecies.
So it's conceivable that these little guys right here are just one hurricane away from extinction?
Yeah, that we could lose them with a major hurricane. That's the reason that we have the captive colony. That's really the only reason that we maintain the captive colony, is in the event that we lost all the animals in the wild, then we would hope to be able to reestablish them from the captive colony after the habitat had achieved some recovery. We don't know precisely what role the beach mouse plays. They really haven't been studied that much, so we're just in the process now of really learning about them.
What have we lost if we lose the beach mouse?
We lost a portion of the natural beach and the natural dunes and natural plants and animals that go along with it. Everything is sacrificed. When you build a parking lot, you give up something. And then you have a parking lot. So that's a decision that you consciously make. Once it's a parking lot, it's never anything but a parking lot.
Each fall, the arrival of the monarch butterfly heralds the end of a season. For scores of migrating birds and insects, Alabama's Gulf Islands are the last vital stop before a long flight to Central America.
They come in, and we've seen them on the way up on this road here. We've seen them on the side, and they get that last nectar, and on the next major cold front, the monarchs migrate across the Gulf of Mexico. You see, the monarchs use the cold front as a propellant across the Gulf. And we're about 685 miles.
Right behind you.
There we go, right there. There's one right there on a flower. The Yucatan's about 685 miles from here.
And if it weren't for this beach in its natural state, if it weren't for that flower, that monarch would never survive.
He'd never survive the trip. He'd never survive the trip. So this is just a beautiful natural habitat, and you might notice right here, as a matter of fact, here's a great indication. We're standing here looking at the monarch butterfly, but we're middle of a road, right where some vehicle decided to go around a barrier and just cut a swath. And the beach system is not like a garden. It's not like a coastal, landward marsh area. It doesn't recover fast. It's a very delicate system. The roots are very shallow. When the truck runs across, it kills the vegetation. Moisture is at a premium down here. They don't get it very often. And so once that's dead, this track may be here for 5, 6, 7 years after it was made.
Unauthorized traffic threatens to destroy the fragile western half of Dauphin Island. An area that once supported 200 to 300 nesting pairs of seabirds now supports only 50 to 60 pairs. Sea Lab's John Dindo has been awarded a grant to try and repair the damage.
Here comes a truck right now. They're breaking the law, aren't they?
Currently, that truck is breaking the law. By state law, motorized vehicles are unauthorized on the beaches and dunes of Alabama. That man with his fishing rods is heading all the way to the west end, and he's physically breaking the law. Because, as you can see, this is such a very small section of land. The Gulf of Mexico is right over here. And as you pan over, right 200 yards away is Mississippi Sound.
Time and time again, our environmental mistakes teach us the cost of repair far exceeds the cost of preservation. Endangered species are the last signals before the complete collapse of a habitat system. Witness the silent warnings of creatures like the endangered wood stork, the piping plover, and the osprey as they browse the Alabama coast en route to a destination beyond the brink of extinction.
There's nothing on the rocks or on the sand, Albert.
Deep in the heart of the Sipsey Wilderness, the search is on for the endangered flattened musk turtle. Found only in Alabama, the turtle is falling victim to a new form of predator.
How much can somebody get for one of these turtles?
You know, I'm not in the black market myself, so I don't know, but I have heard rumors to the effect that these turtles will wholesale from anywhere from $50 to $100 a piece, and I've heard that retail, they go for as high as on the black market is $500 a piece.
$500? What do people do with them?
Look at them, I guess. I don't know. I'm really can't understand the mentality of people who are willing to pay these kinds of sums of money for threatened and endangered species just because they're rare and having a hard time existing. A rarity, I guess, is the only thing I know. You know, the uniqueness of having something that nobody else has.
Commercial exploitation of endangered species is big business. Buyers in Europe and Japan indulge their fancies at the expense of Alabama wildlife.
There you go. Only in Alabama. These look like tooth marks from an alligator.
Right there. Mm-hmm.
And this right here, what could that have been?
Probably a boat prop. Just hit.
Boy.
Another victim is the endangered Alabama red-bellied turtle, which is found only in the Mobile Delta. These turtles are being held as evidence from a government sting operation. Federal agents arrested a Birmingham man after he purchased the turtles from undercover agents. It is the first case of its kind under the Endangered Species Act in Alabama. The would-be turtle dealer offered a conditional guilty plea, and the case is now on appeal.
This happens to be one of the freshwater turtles in which there's basically no information, no biological information. Not the complete absence of information, but basically very, very sketchy amounts of information available. Nobody's done any work on it, basically.
We're almost in the 21st century, and we don't know anything about this turtle?
Basically, that's correct. And one of the reasons that, there's several reasons to protect the species. One is we want to protect it such that we can hopefully guarantee its future. But it's also the state reptile of the state of Alabama. It's called the Alabama red-bellied turtle. It is the official state reptile of the state of Alabama. That's another reason, I think, to justify its existence.
And away they go! It's the first rattlesnake rapes of the day.
Commercial exploitation takes many forms. Biologists argue the annual Op Rattlesnake Roundup encourages wholesale destruction of a variety of endangered species. Rattlesnake cowboys once captured snakes by pouring gasoline into their holes. Half of the rattlers would eventually die, as well as large numbers of the endangered indigo snake, the black pine snake, and the rare Florida pine snake. Many of the holes would also belong to the endangered gopher tortoise. Gopher tortoises continue to disappear as their native sandhill habitat is converted into pine plantations. A specially designed camera shows the tortoise burrowing deep into the sandy soil. But as this video demonstrates, endangered species in Alabama have nowhere left to hide.
Let's go down and try around those rocks down there. Okay. I haven't seen fish, period, in here.
Biologist Bob Stiles is searching for the endangered gold-line darter. Over the years, Stiles has seen the conditions decline in the Cahaba River to the point where the darter has almost disappeared.
One of the problems we've had on the part of some state officials is they see endangered species as simply a nuisance, as something that causes them problems or causes development interest and other economic interest in the state problems, and they've had almost an attitude of I resent it if you suggest that some of the species in the state may be endangered.
Behind the flood of pollution in the Cahaba is a sea of politics. The Alabama Department of Environmental Management continues to issue permits for sewage and industrial discharges into the river. This affects water quality and contributes to the decline of resident endangered species.
ADEM's philosophy has been up till now that it's not their responsibility to protect endangered species as it applies to water quality, because they're not a federal agency. And they point the hand at the EPA, and the EPA has been pointing back at ADEM. So because of the discrepancy in the way they see themselves, we figured that a lawsuit would clear up the issue.
I'm concerned about it. We've made several direct attempts to try to deal with this with ADEM and EPA. We've tried to foster an understanding of the situation. There seems to be some bureaucratic holdups that prohibit us from getting the legal responsibilities fulfilled and adequate information cranked into the process so we can make some headway on endangered species. So I'm rather discouraged, to tell you the truth, about the way things have been going.
Either they say it's not their job, or they don't know how to do it if it was their job. How does that strike you? Well, obviously it strikes me in a pretty bad way, or I wouldn't have sued them, but I think that it reflects seriously on the leadership at ADEM.
What do you hope will happen in this building?
I guess ultimately what we're hoping is that the federal agency and ADEM both are going to be compelled to finally take into consideration the fact that Alabama's endangered species are disappearing, and it's because the government and the state won't do their job.
When confronted with these accusations, the head of ADEM, Lee Pegues, declined to comment because of the lawsuit that's been filed. In talking to him, however, he did confirm for me that he believes protecting endangered species is not the responsibility of his department. While the bureaucratic bickering continues, fragile habitat areas like the Cahaba continue to suffer. Endangered species like the Cahaba shiner move ever closer to the brink of extinction. In a moment, conservation victories and the endangered creatures of the night. The conclusion of our program when we return. Few sights in nature are more glorious than the flight of the bald eagle. The use of the pesticide DDT all but erased the proud bird from Alabama skies. But staunch conservation measures have produced a surprising comeback. Last year, for the first time in decades, a pair of eagles were seen nesting and hatching their young on Alabama soil. The event is hailed as nothing short of a miracle. Through research, enforcement, and public support, an endangered species can be rescued from the brink of extinction, and the victories are continuing to become more common. Once on the endangered species list, flocks of brown pelicans have returned to the coastal skies. At Birmingham's Lake Purdy, mismanagement and neglect reduced a colony of the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker to a single bird. Today, the colony is thriving again. In Madison County, state explorers recently discovered new populations of the rare blind cave shrimp.
This past November, we actually discovered 4 shrimp in the cave across the road, which is the same water that exists in this cave. Based on that theory, we realized that they should also exist in here. The very next day, we made a trip into here and we discovered 2 more. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's really important when there had only been 20 of these shrimp, these blind cave shrimp, Alabama cave shrimp, known to exist. So to discover 6 in 2 days was really a major feat.
In Jefferson County, the discovery and study of the endangered watercress darter has led to the successful start of new populations in other springs.
I don't think we can consider any species as insignificant. First of all, every species on Earth is a unique gene complex. This means that their DNA molecule has a slightly different sequence than other species. And because of this, you know, we've been recently capitalizing on this phenomenon of genetic diversity by transferring the DNA from one species to another to a bacterium, and we've been making human drugs this way.
Finding new homes for the watercress darter helps prevent the possibility of extinction.
We're probably less than 25 yards off the road right here, or even closer to the road, and if a tank truck came by here that had caustic chemicals or petroleum products, those are 2 of the most toxic things to fish that are known. A truck could overturn, have an accident, be hit by another vehicle. That stuff could spill on the roadbed here, and if you see the slope of the land here, it could drain right into this little spring area. If that happened, it could wipe the darter out.
The benefits of many species have long been shrouded in darkness. On the banks of Lake Gunnersville, a colony of endangered gray bats fills the night sky, foraging for food. A single bat can eat up to 3,000 mosquitoes a night. Steel bars have been erected to protect the colony from sightseers, During the mating season, human intrusion would frighten mother bats into dropping their babies to the cave floor. Unable to fly, the babies die.
It's unbelievable that anyone would want to kill a creature such as this. Almost totally beneficial. When you see it making its little face there and opening its mouth and so forth, all he's doing is using his sound to find out where you are. He uses the same thing to capture insects and so forth to help us.
Some bats are captured and fitted with tiny radio transmitters to track their movements. Thanks to research and timely conservation efforts, this endangered colony is on the road to recovery.
It's a different kind of a story, really, because most of the endangered species that we're dealing with, especially species of bats and so forth, we see a constant, steady decline in the numbers of those species. In the case of the gray bat, it's a good story because we're seeing a steady increase in the number of bats. So I think it's a very positive thing that's happening, and the various agencies and so forth that have been responsible for this should be congratulated for this one, because this one is a job very well done.
Beyond Alabama's natural diversity, it's the unusual pockets of rare habitat that make this state a true natural treasure. Many believe the only way to ensure these areas are properly managed is to buy them. A plan to purchase lands for preservation is gaining political support.
When the name was first thought of in my mind, I was sitting in a mountain, on a mountain high up in Jackson County, oddly enough, going turkey hunting. And I saw the uniqueness, I saw the wildlife, I saw the deer flash by, and I thought to myself, I wonder if 100 years from now somebody could sit on this mountain and see what I see and do what I'm doing. And I said, somehow we've got to come up with some way to leave this forever wild. And I said, forever wild. That's it. That's what I'm going to do. So from that concern about passing on to future generations came the Forever Wild program in my mind. And obviously I was pleased to see it pass overwhelmingly in the legislature. Now, it's not going to solve all of the problems, but let me tell you, it is going to put eventually $15 million a year into the Conservation Department in the Forever Wild program to buy land to preserve for future generations so that they can see the wildlife that you and I enjoy today and even see it multiply. Because there are ways that we can buy large tracts of land and let that land not only be serving current population and current needs, but set it aside so that it becomes a nucleus for wildlife where it's protected, where the eagle can build its nest and be secure, where the wildlife that lives there can multiply and 100 years from now still be just as wild and unique as it is today.
Remnants of what used to be Alabama still exist. There's a small but stable population of black bear in the Mobile Delta. In other states, the red wolf is being successfully reintroduced into the wild. And this surprising home video shows what appears to be an adult cougar in the fields of a central Alabama farm. Given half a chance, nature will prevail, and a little compassion goes a long way.
This guy is ready to go. We've been at it now almost 15 years, providing care for injured and orphaned native wildlife and returning them to the wild.
Oak Mountain's Wildlife Rescue Center is the MASH unit of the wild, and Ann Miller is its angel of mercy.
We have had peregrine falcons, we've had a wood stork, we've had bald eagles, and of course we've got our resident cougar, who's actually not a native, but mountain lions or cougars were native to this state until they were completely wiped out.
50% of the injured and 80% of the orphaned who make it to the center are returned to the wild. Today, a threatened bird of prey called a merlin is fully recovered and ready to fly. In the time before man, this was their world. And given time, it can be again. A world where survival is assured on the land, in the sea, and in the sky.
Alabama's endangered species are a reflection of human activities and attitudes toward our environment. The species in trouble today are the victims of decades of mismanagement and abuse. Today, we have learned how to correct our mistakes. We can protect these valuable creatures. We can restore critical habitat areas. But are we willing to make the sacrifices? Endangered species are the barometer warning us of the coming storm. They are the standard by which we will be judged for our stewardship of this earth. If we fail to act, we could very well witness the extinction of many unique forms of life right here in Alabama. And by allowing that to happen, we may well suffer the scorn of the generations who follow. For Earth Save, I'm David Mattingly. Good night.
This program has been brought to you in part by Alabama Gas Corporation and the Southern Natural Gas Company, providing the South with energy-efficient natural gas.